Hey everybody, and welcome to a new episode of my show. I'm Father Roderick, and it is time to tell another story. And this week, I'm going to bring you back to the Shire because this is Tolkien Week. Just a couple of days ago, we celebrated the birthday of Bilbo and Frodo. So, time for a Hobbit story. Many years ago, I think it was in 2009, I was visiting New Zealand. And a friend of mine brought me to the one place that I had dreamed of visiting at one point in my life. And back then, it was not very well known, but for me, as a huge fan of Tolkien, as a massive fan of the movies, the 3 movies that were based on The Lord of the Rings, I was always hoping that one day I might visit the place where some of that story was filmed. And as you may know, all the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed in New Zealand. And New Zealand itself is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's actually one of those countries that if I didn't have any ties to the Netherlands, if I hadn't my responsibilities and my duties as a priest here in the Netherlands, I might actually consider moving to New Zealand. But in the meantime, traveling there every, 10 years helps me to overcome my homesickness. Ever since I visited New Zealand, I felt like, well, that's where I belong. This is the place where I want to be. And so I left part of my heart there. But this one place that I visited in 2009 was on the Northern Island. So a lot of the movies were shot in the Southern Island, which I visited many years later. But there was one area in Middle-earth for which they needed a part of the Northern Island. And I think it was north of Auckland, in the meadows there. It's this nice undulating countryside, which looks very much like, England, parts of France. It looks very European. There was this location that they scouted when they were preparing the movies. And they found this spot with a beautiful big tree in the middle of nowhere. There are no cities, no towns. There's a tiny town not far from that place called Matamata, and but the set that was built is actually still about, I think it's about 15-20 minutes by bus or by car away from the town center of Matamata. So they found this place, and it had all these hills, this big tree, and when Peter Jackson saw footage of that place, he was like, that is the Shire. And he could immediately picture how on top of the hill he would build Bag End, and then all the other smaller hills would be perfect locations for other hobbit holes, and then that big huge tree that was standing at the foot of the hill would, of course, be the party tree that we know from the story. And that is how that very remote part of the Northern Island was transformed over the course of several months into the film set for Hobbiton. And Bilbo's house was on top of the hill, and there was even a small tree growing on top of the hill, which I think is also something you see in the drawings that Tolkien himself made of Hobbiton when he was telling the story of the Hobbit to his children. And so they created these fake hobbit holes, basically, because these were just hills and they couldn't dig into the hills like hobbits would do. But they made these facades with the round doors in it, and they created a bridge over. There was this small river that ended in a pond, and then on the other side of the river, they wanted to create an inn. The Green Dragon Inn, and there was also a mill next to the bridge, all based on the descriptions that you find in the books of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And all of that was made for the movies, and as you may know, they were filming the movies back to back then. So all these scenes were filmed in one long chunk of time, and they were filming all three movies at once. I still don't know how Peter Jackson pulled that off, because you have to constantly know, okay, so this particular scene is taking place in this part, in this movie, in this part of the movie. The actors constantly had to switch back and forth in time. And since they took, of course, a long time to film all those three movies, you can even see some of the actors, especially the ones that play the hobbits, you see them evolve and grow up a little bit. And so for The Shire, they were able to film both the beginning of the story and, of course, as you remember, the final scenes of the last movie there too, when Frodo and the Fellowship return to the Shire, and then ultimately, of course, Frodo is not going to stay there, and he hands over his writing duties in the Red Book, where Frodo has been continuing the story that his uncle Bilbo started writing down. He hands that duty over to Sam, and Sam is the one who continues this legacy. And that is how we got the books, at least in Tolkien's imagination. And then Frodo leaves for the Grey Havens and moves over to the eternal realm of the elves. And the Shire remains in place and is still there today. We don't know exactly how long ago Tolkien situates the events in the Third Era, but somewhere in my imagination, Middle-earth has survived on these two islands of New Zealand, and you can still go there all these years and decades and centuries later. And it still looks exactly the same. So imagine you're sitting in this bus, and there's this lady who's going to give you a tour. And back then, this was right after they finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I'd seen some photos on the internet, but nothing beats being there for real. And it was a beautiful morning. It was springtime weather. I was there, I think, in September, but it's of course all the seasons are the opposite of over here in Europe. So it was really nice. The everything was green. There were flowers, and then the bus parks not immediately near the set. You still have to walk a little bit. There's a bit of a visitor center, and then you go to for the tour to the place where they filmed everything. And I remember that the first thing we saw was this open space with all the hills. But instead of the way it looked in the movies, it was much more empty. Everything was covered in grass. Where the hobbit holes used to be with the doors, the only thing that remained was some white painted plywood. And they had kind of sawn out the contours of the original hobbit holes, but the hobbit holes themselves weren't there anymore. So on the one hand, it looked like the overall landscape you saw in the movies. On the other hand, it was as if all the hobbits had moved, and this was just a kind of a memorial site for where once the hobbits used to live. So that was a bit jarring and a bit strange to experience that. It didn't look the same, and yet it felt so familiar. The lady showed us a number of photos. There was this this sign, and they had posted some photos that they took while Peter Jackson and his crew was filming there. And on the photos, you saw the little hobbit holes, and even the actors dressed up. Most of them were kids, actually, dressed up as hobbits, running around. And then for the close-ups, of course, they would use all sorts of visual camera trickery to make the hobbits look very small. And the inside of the hobbit holes, that was all filmed on stage. None of that was realized on location in Matamata. But on these photos, you see all these nice, round wooden hobbit doors and the windows and everything. And then she shows us a piece of styrofoam. And on the one side, you can see it's all white and, well, just like styrofoam. And on the other side, it was painted gray. And she says, this is actually what most of the set was made of. You don't realize that because it looks real, but all of this was made out of very cheap material because they were only filming there for a relatively short time. As you know, most of the story of The Lord of the Rings doesn't take place in the Shire. So since they only were going to use that location for a few months, and they didn't own it. They didn't own the place. They had just rented it from the farmer who actually had his sheep walking around there. And back then, the sheep were everywhere. And they were making sure that the grass wouldn't grow too tall. And so in between the hobbit holes in the distance, you saw all these sheep, different parts of a flock. And so after they were done filming, they tore down the entire set because it was so fragile that it wouldn't survive the winter or rain. And according to what she told me later, was Peter Jackson asked them to bring all that material to his own estate or his home. I don't know exactly where he lives, but apparently he's got a huge backyard, and he had them construct or reconstruct the set partially in his own or near his own home, or I don't know exactly where, if it's in his backyard or not. But anyway, so none of that original material was on location. So we walked around there, and this was in the beginning when Lord of the Rings was, of course, massive, but the movies had been shot, and kind of the interest for the story started to dwindle down, and everything became, normal again, and nobody thought that we would ever see more stories on the movie screen, because the only story left that was maybe one day going to be filmed was The Hobbit. But The Hobbit, it's a very small book, so that they probably wouldn't turn that into a movie. However, I remember during the tour, you walk up to the top of the hill, and back then the tree was still there and doing very well. Later on, all that would change. But anyway, so I remember that we took a photo from within the Bilbo's house, and so you see me in the opening of the door, and in the background you see this beautiful landscape. There's nothing there, so you really can picture like I am in Middle Earth. This is Middle Earth. But on the inside of the hill, there was nothing. It was just basically a very small hole that they dug, but there's no furniture, nothing. And the door wasn't there either. It was all, as I said, just this facade in white plywood. But when we walked down the hill to the party tree, the lady told us that, in fact, they had started to do some gardening. And she showed us a few apple trees that they had planted, and there was this small passageway. It was kind of like it looks like a dike, like a bit of a hill, and there was a road from the foot of the hill to, I think, to the river or to the lake maybe, and they had started to plant flowers and everything, because back then, she said, there are very strong indications that Peter Jackson is working right now on a Hobbit movie. And they've told us to prepare the set, to start working. And of course, if they ever return to this place to film the Shire, they will have to rebuild everything. But, and this is an actual problem, since all the flowers and the trees were also removed, or maybe back then they weren't even real trees. We need to plant them now, so that if they want to film in a couple of years from now, all this must look as if it's been here for decades. And so back then they were already, just in case this whole movie project would be greenlit, they were already preparing the environment. And so, of course, as you can imagine, I was so excited to be there. And I wanted to take pictures of everything and to film everything. And I discovered, and this has been one of the biggest shocks in my life, that I had forgotten to charge my phone and my camera batteries. This must have been because of the big jet lag. But I just, my camera shut down, and I think even my phone, I tried to take a selfie or to film something of those trees that they were planting. I think I have like literally 1 or 2 minutes of footage from that. It was still the iPhone 4. And James, who came with me, James, by the way, while I'm recording this, is in the chat room. So hi, James. Thankfully, he had a professional DSLR camera, and so he took a bunch of photos. So I still have memories of that day, but my own equipment, I forgot to charge the batteries. And so I kind of feared that if I would return to the Netherlands, I wouldn't even have any tangible memories of that experience. And since it already looked a bit like just a shadow of what the set must have looked like while they were filming, I was just taken aback, and I felt so nostalgic and so sad. It's like, oh, this will they ever come back here? Will this ever look like the way it looks in the movies? And when I returned to the Netherlands, for several years, actually, that visit to Matamata was one of the most special moments in my life, and I didn't have that many photos to kind of bring back those memories. Now, flash forward in time a number of years. I think for 2 years, I've been scouting the news. Like, are they going to film The Hobbit? Is there any news? And it was this whole project kept being postponed, and there were all sorts of problems with the Tolkien estate, etc. Because, of course, The Hobbit, even though the rights to The Hobbit were sold by Tolkien so he could finance his children's studies, there are still a lot of caveats. When anyone who wants to use The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings still will have to talk with the Tolkien estate to negotiate all sorts of other things, what you can do, what you can't do, and how these new versions of the stories must honor Tolkien's legacy. So it took forever for this movie, which back then was still, I think, being conceptualized as one or maybe 2 movies. It seemed like it would never happen. And then in 2011, I think, finally we got word that they were going to make 2 Hobbit movies. And this was, of course, so joyful to hear, they would go back to Matamata. They would go back to the place where they had initially filmed The Shire, and they would rebuild the entire set. But this time, they wouldn't build it with styrofoam and plywood. No, this time they would build the set in such a way that it could be preserved after filming was done. Of course, this was much easier to negotiate with the local authorities, and they were probably able to strike a very good deal with the farmer who owned those lands, because they knew from The Lord of the Rings how incredibly important that franchise was and remained for New Zealand, for tourism. And so once the movies were greenlit, they knew that they wanted that place to stay, to look like the Shire, so it would become a new tourist attraction. And so many, many years, I never thought that I would return to New Zealand. But many years later, I think it was in 2016, I actually was invited back to, not to New Zealand initially, but to Australia. But since I was going to travel all the way to Australia, I figured I might as well book a second flight and go back to New Zealand. And that's what I did. I think my total stay in Down Under was like 2.5 weeks, and I spent, I think, about 10 days in New Zealand. And this time, not only did I go to Auckland, and I would be able to go back to Matamata with James, but I would also travel to Wellington. I took an internal flight, and thanks to my friends over there, they found me a family who actually lent me their second car, and I was able to drive all the way to the southern part of the southern island, where I was able to visit the places where they had filmed the Rivendell and a lot of the mountain stuff that you see in the Lord of the Rings, and so that's a whole other story. But as far as the Shire is concerned, so I went back to Matamata. We took the bus, and this time the visitor center was much bigger, and it was really you could tell that this time they had organized this perfectly. And it was a very quiet day. The weather forecast wasn't very favorable. There would be rain later on that day. But when we arrived, maybe because of the weather forecast, there weren't that many people. And so this time there were several groups that got the tour. Back then, in 2009, there was just this one lady, I think, and it was just one or maybe two groups per day. Now there were several concurrent groups walking around there on the premises. And I immediately saw that everything had changed. And this is the weirdest thing of this story. So again, the starting point of the tour was in the same place where you see the entirety of the premises. You see the hills in the background. But this time, no more white plywood. This time, all the hobbit houses were there. And not only that, they had little gardens. And there was furniture. There was like rocking chairs in front of the hobbit homes. There was even some smoke coming from the chimneys, like as if all these hobbit holes were really dug into the mountain. And we had another guide, and he said, you're lucky to be here today because it's very quiet. So we have all the time in the world for our tour. And in fact, when I'm done, I'll just let you explore. You can take as much time as you want. There's no rush. We'll end in the Green Dragon. And so I looked in the direction of the Green Dragon, and to my great surprise, the bridge that we had only seen during the first visit on photos, the bridge was completely rebuilt. The mill was there, and they had built the entirety of the Green Dragon, which is the biggest building of Hobbiton. Of course, like formally, the biggest building is Bilbo's house, but since that is all underground, you don't see it. You don't see how big it is. So the Green Dragon, they built the entire thing. That's where the tour would end, and then we would be able to walk around as much as we want. So that's what I did. And we got to tour, and it felt so different. And it was as if this was several years after my first visit, but it felt as if I had traveled back in time. This was more the Shire than it was when I initially finished. So it was such a strange experience of, I know that I am now in the future, but I am actually in the past. This is what it looks like in The Lord of the Rings. They did a terrific job recreating everything that we know, because of course the Hobbit movie takes place before the events of the Lord of the Rings. So it's actually normal that everything looked slightly different from what we saw of the Shire in the Lord of the Rings movies. And I remember that we walked through there were all pathways leading us alongside the various hobbit holes, and I saw those apple trees. The apple trees that they planted all those years ago now looked like real full-grown apple trees. And then the guide took us to the top of the hill, and he said, "You see that little tree? Like a couple of years ago, that tree was still doing well, but it's dying, and you may actually notice that some of the branches are now fake." Weta Studios in Wellington, they actually just rebuilt part of that tree. And then we turned around and we saw this this big party tree, but it didn't look as good as it looked in 2009. In fact, what happened was that there had been a storm, and a number of big branches of the tree had broken off. And then the tree itself was also not as healthy as it used to be. So they were a bit worried about the future of the tree because it's such an iconic tree. That was actually the one thing that convinced Peter Jackson that this was the place for the Shire. They were afraid that maybe that tree wouldn't make it over the years. But then they said, well, we have Weta Studios. If necessary, they'll just completely build a new tree and you won't be able to tell that it's a fake tree. So the tree that's right now on top of Bag End is in fact completely fake. It is a prop. Isn't that amazing? And then also the green door of Bag End is now always ajar. So it's always a bit open. And on the inside, instead of just being this muddy hole that they dug in the hill, they actually put up some walls there and a hint of furniture. Not everything, of course, because it's just impossible to build that underground. But now it feels very much like a home. And in my imagination, I could just step in and live there. And also, so they brought us back to the inn, to the Green Dragon Inn, and it had started to rain, and it was actually quite chilly. So we had a beer. There's beer that they were brewing specifically for the Green Dragon, and I remember that I ordered like pie. They had these cottage pies, and you could sit in front of the fireplace. There's this beautiful little Hobbit fireplace with two very comfy seats, and I was having like a beer on a side table. I had pie in my hands, warm pie, and I was sitting warming myself at the fire, and I was just a hobbit. It was one of the most incredible moments of my life. And I can go back anytime at will to that place. And this time, of course, I had my camera and I have filmed like, I don't know, hours and hours of material, even though it was raining and it was starting to rain quite a bit. And I think at one point I just left James behind and I went for a big tour and I was filming everything that I could see. And it's amazing to have that footage from that visit. Now, one of the things that I've learned from this experience is that oftentimes when we look back on our lives and on important experiences, we almost feel a little bit like the elves when they are starting to leave Middle-earth. They've been living in Middle-earth for centuries, but now, of course, that Mordor is getting stronger and the era of the elves seems to be at its end. They are preparing to go to the Grey Havens and to leave Middle-earth forever. And there's always a bit of that nostalgia in the elves, also because they live so long. And so a lot of the people that they befriend, or the dwarves or the elves, or the humans, they die, whereas the elves are still alive. And so there's always this sadness in the elven culture, but oftentimes we are the same. We look back to important moments in our lives and we feel a bit of regret. It's like I will never be able to go back, and it was so amazing, but now it's just a memory, and the best is behind me. I'm only getting older, and there will be a moment in my life that I won't be able to travel anymore, and so it will be forever out of my reach. And you know what? In fact, this whole experience showed me that sometimes it's actually the opposite. Sometimes when you first arrive in a place and you think, well, this is it. It's just a remainder of what once was a beautiful film set, but it was all made with plywood and styrofoam. None of this will ever look the way it looked in the movies. But some people were already planting seeds and planting these little apple trees and flower beds because they had hope that this future movie based on The Hobbit might actually get greenlit. And they wanted this place to be ready for that, to be ready for that future. And thanks to their vision, like their hope, like, well, if we want this place to be the Shire in the future, we need to start working on it right now, because it takes time for plants to grow, for trees to grow. If they hadn't had that foresight, if they hadn't had that vision and that hope, it wouldn't have looked as good as it did. And so many years later, the Shire was actually more beautiful than it was when they first filmed it for The Lord of the Rings. So the best is not always behind you. Sometimes it's ahead of you and you don't even realize it. And what is the life lesson that I take from this whole experience is that sometimes you have to keep planting seeds. Even if it's just a dream that you have, an ideal, and maybe it will never happen, but if you don't start planting seeds now, then none of that will ever grow. If you don't have that dream, then nothing will ever come from it. But if you keep hoping that the best is yet to come and that you never know what God will give you, will grant you in the future, you give up too early. Dreams need hope, and hope sometimes needs dreams, and beautiful things in life often just require that first step. Let's plant some seeds, because you never know. And I had never known that one day I would be walking around there an entire morning in the Shire, and this time my batteries were charged, and I did have spare batteries, and I did have a lot of SD cards, and so I filmed everything that I could do. And you know what? Back then, I almost was certain that wouldn't be my last visit to Matamata and to the Shire. It's almost like in Rome, you have this fountain, the Trevi Fountain, and when people visit Rome, there's this tradition that they turn around with their back to the fountain, and they toss a coin over their shoulder, and if it lands in the water, it is a promise that one day you will be back in Rome. Well, that's how I felt in the Shire. I didn't toss a coin in the river or in the lake, but I knew, you know what? This country keeps pulling on me. One day I'll be back here. One day I'll return to the Shire. Never give up hope. Never stop dreaming. That's my story for today. Thank you so much for listening. There will be another story next week. And in the meantime, happy Tolkien week, and maybe a good occasion to pick up those books again, or to watch a movie or six, because you can watch nonstop Tolkien for weeks now. And another thing, before I forget, I never thought that we would return to Middle Earth with movies and with TV shows as well. But look at us now. We have stories of the Second Era. We've got the amazing Rings of Power. Some of that is also filmed in New Zealand. It gives me even more reasons to return. And of course, if I return, I'll bring you along. Take care, and talk to you soon.
How do you not like movies?
They're predictable. Like, the guy gets the girl, and that kid sees dead people, and Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Not liking movies is like not liking puppies.
They're fine. I just get bored and never make it to the end.
You know, you need a movie education. You need a movication. I'm gonna give it to you.
I discovered the most amazing television series just recently started started streaming on Max, on HBO Max. It's still called HBO Max here in the Netherlands for some reason. And it's the series called Poker Face. I think it's already streaming in North America, but here it's new. They're posting a new episode every week. It's created by Rian Johnson, of course, the director and writer of The Last Jedi, and now also very acclaimed director of two kind of detective stories, a bit Sherlock Holmes type stories. One movie is called Knives Out, which was a huge box office success, and then A Glass Onion was the second movie, and I think they're even creating even more movies. But this television series, also created by Rian Johnson, stars Natasha Lyonne, who you may actually remember from A Russian Doll. She's a great actress, very broad spectrum. And in this particular series, she plays this a woman who starts in the first episode, she works in a casino. But she has one almost supernatural talent. She knows when someone is telling the truth, and she also knows when someone is lying. There is a murder in that casino, and she very quickly discovers that some of the people that she thought she could trust were involved in that murder. And then she has to somehow solve the murder, make sure that those people get arrested, but she doesn't want to get in trouble herself. So then from that moment on, she's on the run. And every episode is a place where she stops with her car and something happens and she has to solve the murder. And at the same time, it's usually very dangerous for her, so she needs to also make it out alive herself. It's a fantastic television series. I'm so enjoying it. It is beautifully filmed. Every episode is about an hour long, and it feels like a movie. The acting is amazing. I love the humor. Natasha Lyonne has this, I don't know, this charisma. I'm constantly glued to the screen, and every episode has a surprise at the end that I so far have not seen coming, and it's like, oh, that is brilliant. So in that respect, it's similar to what Rian Johnson did with Knives Out and Glass Onion, where you also have that twist at the end. But to do that for a television series, it's amazing. I love also the technical aspect of the television series. It's beautifully shot. I love the color grading. So the color grading is the way in which you modify the hues and the saturation of everything you see on screen. And it gives these television episodes a very cinematic feel. This is actually one of the things that I hope to be able to do with my new iPhone, the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I'll talk about it in the tech section of the show. But you can do very, very professional color grading because now these new iPhones are able to film like professional cameras. So anyway, it's like everything oozes quality. So if you've not checked it out, take a look at so the series is called Poker Face, and it is amazing television. Amazing television. Wheel of Time, also going from episode to episode, getting better all the time. The 6th episode just streamed. I think it was number 6, or was that Ahsoka? Maybe both of them are at episode 6. But anyway, Wheel of Time, amazing. This 6th episode was the best of all 2 seasons. As I mentioned before in my reviews, it's very different from the books. It's almost as if it is a parallel story or like a retelling of the story, but it's not exactly what the books are doing. Also, sometimes they've combined some characters, but there's this one story thread in the books that is about someone who is enslaved, literally, magically, and it's one of the main characters. And I remember that the books made me cry. It was so horrible and so my heart went out to that. It's a fictional character, but I just couldn't stop thinking about the events in that particular book. I think it was in The Great Hunt, or maybe it's the 3rd book. I'm not sure. Anyway, that part of the story made a massive impression on me. And now we got to see the television version of it. So the Wheels of Time television version. And it was even better than the books. The acting is so insanely good. And I just couldn't stop watching. It was so amazing. That actress should get an Emmy. You can't get Academy Awards for a television series, but if that were possible, she should have an Oscar for it. It was amazing acting. So, Wheel of Time, if you were on the fence whether to watch it or not, highly recommend it. Don't miss it. The first season is a bit slow, and there are some choices that they make for the series that I personally, as a fan of the books, don't appreciate that much, but all there is also so much to love about what they did with this television series. What else did I watch? I continue to watch Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And so I still have my Star Trek fix every week. And I'm so glad, because Deep Space Nine, still haven't finished the series. So for me, it's all new. I don't know what's going to happen. It is fantastic television. Of course, it's dated now. And even the storytelling, it's kind of slow. And there are lots of episodes that nowadays we would call filler episodes. Although, of course, writers never consider any episode filler. It's just that you have the main story, and then you have some intermediate stories. But some episodes are better than others. But all in all, it's great to have my weekly Star Trek appointment. And then, of course, there was Ahsoka, episode 6. We finally get to see the villain, and it was all that I hoped for and better. This is Star Wars like we've never seen before. I still feel like the dialogue is not as good as in Andor. So the overall writing of Andor is better, but the mythology in Ahsoka is unparalleled. It is, I think, really George Lucas's vision, and the way they expand our comprehension of the Force and all these themes of loyalty and, what makes someone evil and what not. It is explored in brand new ways. I love all the actors, and I really hope that this will get a second season, even before, because ultimately they're going to do a movie where they will bring the stories of The Mandalorian and Ahsoka and Rebels. They will all come together in this theatrical release. But I do hope we get a second season first. And there are only 2 episodes left. So I think, they're never going to be able to wrap up everything in just 2 episodes. There's going to be a second season, and I am all there for it, because I remember seeing these actors and actresses on stage in London during the Star Wars celebration, and some of them, of course, had already appeared in Star Wars movies and TV shows, so they got a lot of applause. But I remember that there were several actresses that were completely unknown. And they themselves were also, like, it was their first appearance at a fan convention. But now, if they would ever return for the next Star Wars celebration, or even before that on Comic-Con or whatever, I think that people will just have such a massive reaction to them. It's like Hayden Christensen. When he came back on stage in London, he got like a standing ovation for 5-6 minutes long. And he started to cry. He was just so taken aback by that love that he felt. And it's just because Star Wars matures over time. It's like a good bottle of wine. The older it gets, the more you start to appreciate it, and the deeper it becomes. And so to have Hayden Christensen back in Ahsoka, to see all these characters come alive, people that we've only seen in animated versions. I can't imagine how this must feel for Dave Filoni, who created these characters, who told these stories, and to see them in live action, it's insane. It's the beauty of creativity. We're hopefully in the final stage of the writers and actors strike. They are currently, as I'm recording this, again, back at the table to negotiate. But these television series make me root so much for these writers and actors, because what they do is worth so much more than just money. And that's the problem with all these big companies. They seem to be so focused on money alone. But what is created here is global culture. And this is worth something. And this is why I keep subscribing to these streaming companies, because I want more stories like this. I want Star Wars to thrive. I want these actors and these writers to thrive and to give us the best of what they can do. And this is also why I really hope that Peter Jackson will be back for future movies in Middle Earth. And of course, they are planning on doing more Middle Earth stuff. I love Rings of Power. This is the golden age of storytelling, and I'm here for it.
Catholics rock!
It's time for our weekly visit to the Peculiar Bunch, and it is time for the Gospel for Geeks.
Catholics can be a peculiar bunch. No meat on Friday.
Oh, meat? What do they eat? Light bulbs?
In every episode of the Gospel for Geeks, I look at the Sunday readings and I try to clarify them using examples from movies and TV shows.
Man, you guys got more crazy rules than Blockbuster Video.
There's this one scene in the books of Harry Potter that always moves me when I read it. I don't think it's in the movie version of it, at least not the current movie version. Maybe in the television series that they are currently preparing, they might include this scene, and I hope they do, because it's a very, very touching moment in Harry Potter's life. It's on the occasion. This is in the Deathly Hallows, and it's on the occasion of Harry's birthday, and you know that's how his adventure starts. It's his birthday, but the Dursleys have brought Harry to this very remote island where they hope they can keep Harry Potter away from Dumbledore and his minions, and Harry has the worst birthday of his life. He doesn't even get a cake. So instead, in the sand on the floor of the cottage, he just draws a cake, and then the door is slammed in, and there is Hagrid, and he is there to take Harry away from these horrible foster parents and to bring him to Hogwarts so he can become a student and he become a wizard. Actually, Harry, you are a wizard. And it's his birthday, so he actually brings Harry a birthday cake. It's a little bit clumsy because, of course, Hagrid is not a very good cook, but it is one of the most beautiful birthday presents that Harry received. So the whole story of Harry Potter starts with a birthday celebration. And that cake that Hagrid makes for Harry is much more than just a cake. It's a sign that he's not just an orphan. No, people are waiting for him. There is a place where he will be welcome, where he will be loved, where he will find a new family. And this is why it's even more painful that Dudley is starting to eat the cake that was meant for Harry. And, well, we all know how Hagrid punishes the boy with a pig's tail and then brings Harry along with him in his flying motorbike so Harry can start his first year at Hogwarts. Now, many years later, it's again Harry's birthday. And this time, of course, he's already been quasi-adopted by Ron's family. And they are, I think this takes place at the Weasleys, at the house of the Weasleys. I'll just read you the passage. When they arrived in the kitchen, they found a pile of presents waiting on the table. Bill and Monsieur Delacour were finishing their breakfast, while Mrs. Weasley stood chatting to them over the frying pan. "Arthur told me to wish you a happy 17th, Harry," said Mrs. Weasley, beaming at him. "He had to leave early for work, but he'll be back for dinner. That's our present on top." Harry sat down, took the square parcel she had indicated, and unwrapped it. Inside was a watch, very like the one Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had given Ron for his 17th. It was gold, with stars circling round the face instead of hands. "It's traditional to give a wizard a watch when he comes of age," said Mrs. Weasley, watching him anxiously from beside the cooker. "I'm afraid that one isn't new like Ron's. It was actually my brother Fabian's, and he wasn't terribly careful with his possessions. It's a bit dented on the back, but..." The rest of her speech was lost. Harry had got up and hugged her. He tried to put a lot of unsaid things into the hug, and perhaps she understood them because she patted his cheek clumsily when he released her. then waved her hand in a slightly random way, causing half a pack of bacon to flop out of the frying pan onto the floor. This always moves me, even now when I'm reading it to you, because there are a number of details in there that are so beautiful. That watch, says Mrs. Weasley, it's not a new watch. I'm so sorry. So they gave Ron a new watch for his birthday. They only had a second-hand one for Harry. But why is this not a problem? In fact, this is the best gift that Harry could wish for. The reason that Ron got a new watch for his 17th birthday was that, of course, Ron being being the youngest boy of the family, always would receive these second-hand clothes from his older brothers. He never got anything new because they weren't wealthy. They didn't have much money. So he would always get hand-me-downs, except for this watch. For once, now that he came of age, he received a beautiful new watch from his parents. No more hand-me-downs. This is yours. So for Harry, they gave him the old watch of the brother of Mrs. Weasley. And Harry, of course, doesn't need a present. We know that Harry's parents were rich. He has a lot of money sitting in the bank of Gringotts. So he could buy any watch he wants. In fact, in the first movie, he buys all the candy that is available on the train. He could also easily afford nice things for himself. But that hand-me-down second-hand watch for him is a symbol of the fact that he is now a part of the family. Mrs. Weasley gives him basically an heirloom. You only give that to your children. And so this is why Harry is so emotional when he unpacks that gift and he hears that story. Because Mrs. Weasley gives him the greatest gift that you can give an orphan boy. And that is the gift of a family, of a mother and a father who love you, think of you at your birthday, and give something of their own family over to you because you are just as much part of the family as all the other kids. And so this brings me to the gospel reading of this 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time of the year A. It's the well-known story. It's the parable that Jesus tells his disciples about the kingdom of God. And he compares it to a man who has a vineyard, but he doesn't have personnel. And it's the time of the harvest, so he sends out his caretaker to the marketplace, go hire some people. And so he hires a number of workers, and they start working in the vineyard. And then, well, there's too much work, so he goes back to the town several times, and even at like 1 hour before they're closing, he still finds a couple of people who are just standing there doing nothing, and he says, "You want to work in the vineyard of my Lord? Go ahead." And then an hour later, the work is done, and now it's time to pay. And these first workers had a deal with the caretaker of the vineyard that they would work for one coin or one denarii, I think it's called. But they start paying the guys who came in at the very last moment. They start paying them first, so they get the same amount of money that was in the contract with the first workers. And so everybody gets paid, and then these guys who had been working there all day long, they get the same amount of money as the guys who just worked for 1 hour. And they take the money, but then they're super grumpy. Like, come on, we thought we've worked here all day long in the sun. It was hot. It was a lot of work. And you pay us the same as these guys who've only worked 1 hour when the sun was already setting. And so what's up with that? And then the moral of the story is that the Lord of the vineyard says, well, you were perfectly happy to work for this amount of money. Why are you unhappy now? You were totally fine when I recruited you. And And it's only now that you're comparing yourself with these other guys that all of a sudden the money that first made you so happy now feels like not enough. And so you're basically telling me that I cannot do whatever I please with my money? Or you're accusing me because I'm good? And why does Jesus tell this story? There are several layers in everything that Jesus says. And I think that one of the first things you need to consider is that this version of the story is told by Matthew. And Matthew is, of course, originally from a Jewish background. He writes for a primarily Jewish audience. And there was quite a bit of discord in these early Christian communities between the people that had grown up as Jews and had converted to become followers of Jesus. They had been baptized, but then a few people in all these communities were not Jewish. They weren't brought up with faith. They actually may have a pagan background or nothing at all. They too had converted. They were baptized, and now in those early churches they had an equal say. They too had just as much value as anyone else. Plus, some of the rules were actually changed because of these newcomers. So, for instance, circumcision. That was a decision by the apostles that, well, that's no longer necessary. And some of the originally Jewish people, they were like, well, come on, we've been faithful all our lives, and now these new people are treated just as us. Don't we have a little bit more value? More, This is the kind of discord that comes from comparing yourself to someone else and becoming jealous of the love that someone else receives, even though before you started comparing yourself, you were totally fine. And this is, I think, for Matthew, very important to convey to these early Christians. For God, you are all equal. It doesn't God doesn't limit his love based on how long you've loved him back. No, God can only love everybody equally. Even sinners are loved by God. That they don't want to receive that love, that's the problem. But the love of God is infinite, and it's for everyone. It's the same amount of love. Whether you are a tiny glass or you're a big, huge beer glass, if you fill them up with beer, they're both going to be full. So that's kind of how it works. So even if you're just a very new convert, you can count on the same amount of love and respect from God as someone who's been faithful all their life. And thankfully, because otherwise heaven would be based on merit. But if you look at your own life, there are so many ways in which you screwed up what God intended for you. Thankfully, God is not measuring his love based on what we succeeded in or not. And it becomes a huge problem for communities if you start comparing yourself. But this is also true just personally. The moment you start comparing yourself and you start believing that your value is somehow related to how much money you make or how much stuff you have or how successful you are in your career, you completely lose what is your true value. Your value is to be loved by God as one of his children. And God does not care if you're rich or poor, if you're very successful or you're a big failure in your own eyes. He loves you just as much. And so the problem with these workers is that they start comparing themselves to others. And so they forget that for the entirety of the day that they'd been working for the owner of the vineyard, they actually really liked him. And now all of a sudden they start to resent him. But nothing changed. This Lord is just as good as he used to be. So what changed? They changed. They started comparing themselves to others. And then all of a sudden they didn't feel good enough. But for the Lord, he appreciated their work. He appreciated their craftsmanship. And that's why he pays them. It's just that he also wants to pay those that were, for whatever reason, unable to work a full day. And he wants to reward him just as well because he's just a good guy. And so this, when you bring this back to the story of Harry Potter, Harry didn't look at that watch that he got and looked at the back, and when Mrs. Weasley tells him, well, it's a secondhand watch, he wasn't like, oh, why don't I get a new watch? Ron did get a new watch and a brand new one, and I get a secondhand one? Come on, I don't want to get this watch. Why don't you buy me a new one? So I'm not really as much a son of you as Ron, and I'm out of here. I'm going back to the Dursleys. No, obviously not. Because Harry sees the watch for what it truly is. And that is a sign of familial, of family love. And he sees Mrs. Weasley as his mother, and that's why he embraces her so much. And Mrs. Weasley later on will risk her own life to make sure that Harry is safe in the final battle of Hogwarts. You know, Mrs. Weasley is doing what a lot of parents can identify with, and that's you'd rather die yourself than that your child is in peril. And for Mrs. Weasley, that is just as much true for Harry as it is for the twins, as it is for Ron. The moment you start looking at material value and you connect that to your own value and the respect you have for yourself, you're in big trouble. And I think that's what Jesus wants to convey to his disciples. First of all, for themselves. Never think that you are less worthy, less lovable than anyone else. God, you're all God's children, but also in your own, in the way you yourself treat others. Treat them equally. Every child is loved, even the ones that sometimes may cause harm and do stupid things, but always keep in mind that God loves them equally and hopes that they will open up to him. You do the same. That's why this is a hard story. Don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare people. Like, never have favorites in your friendship with others, and just receive everything that God gives you every day as a gift for today. When we pray the Our Father, we don't pray for big food reserves. No, we pray, give us this day our daily bread. It's an act of trust. It's an act of faith that God will also provide tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, because he loves us. He loves us more than birds and trees and apples and butterflies. We are his children. He will take care of us. There's no need to ever worry that he won't have enough love for us. And since our love is coming from that source, it should equally be for everyone in our lives. That's what I wanted to share with you. And next week, I'll try to explain the readings of the next Sunday with another story from the movies, games, or TV shows.
When did you become an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics?
Last night. The packet. The extraction theory papers. Am I the only one who did the reading?
I read a biography by an actor of Chinese descent, Chinese origin, which, of course, is extra interesting for me because I have family in China. The book is called We Were Dreamers, and it's written by Simu Liu. And that may ring a bell or not, but he actually is the actor who plays Shang-Chi in the Marvel movie Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So I heard an interview with this actor on a podcast, and he mentioned that he had written a biography, so I picked it up and read it, and I loved it. It's a great story. There are some very relatable things in it, especially his contentious relationship with his Asian parents, who never tell him that they love him. Always criticize him. He's got a lot of damage, like trauma that he has to go through, and for a long time the relationship with his parents is almost non-existent because he feels like they only appreciate him for if he brings in money, but as an actor and as a burgeoning actor, he's not bringing in much money. He's not very successful, and he feels like his parents don't really appreciate him for who he is. It's only much later on that they reconcile and everything. So all that, loved it in the book. It's very well written. The actor really seems like a nice guy. It's an easy read. There's one big downside. And this is why I actually didn't give it a very high rating on Goodreads. The book stops when actually I was most ready for a good story. It stops at the first day of shooting Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. He tells no stories about filming. He tells no stories about his career as a superhero actor, how the movie was received. That's all the stuff that I want to read in a book about an actor who actually promotes his book by saying, I'm the actor who plays Shang-Chi. So I want to hear the good stories of behind the scenes and how the story came together and all that. None of that is in the book. I'm like, come on. You tease us for an entire book, and then the moment the good stuff is supposed to be told, none of that is told. I don't know if it's because he signed an NDA or because Disney is very strict about this, but I felt a little bit, how do I say that nicely? I was disappointed. I expected more of this book. Maybe in the future there will be a sequel. Anyway. Another book that I started to read, which is very much a joy to read, is the third book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. Mistborn is a story that takes place, I explained this last week, on one of the planets in the Cosmere, which is kind of the galaxy, like Star Wars galaxy, but then for Brandon Sanderson's fictional world. People can use magic. And every series of books is also about a different magic system. And in this third book, it's all about a prophecy, about old tales. There are very quite a few elements that make me think of the Wheel of Time, but it's very entertaining. The one thing, this third book is actually the one that so far, because I'm only at 50% of the book, is maybe the hardest one to read. It's a little bit political. There's a lot of inner monologue or inner dialogue, and it's all about, I keep waiting for the story to get going, but I've already been reading for 8 hours, and I was like, come on, get going. I want to, don't explain stuff, show it to me. Brandon Sanderson himself said in an interview that third book was the hardest one to write. And there were several story threads that didn't work at first, and he had to rewrite some of them. And, well, he's ultimately happy with the final result. But I feel that this book it just feels more like a struggle. And I know that it's going to be okay, because usually, this is also true for the other two books of the Mistborn series, they get really good towards the end. There's usually a very, very nice payoff of everything they set up. But this one is like, come on. I want more stuff needs to happen. It's a little bit too long-winded. This is also one of the problems that I have with the books of Wheel of Time. Some of those books are just, they go on and on and on. They introduce like a gazillion new names and people, and then a lot of these people never come back in the rest of the story. So you feel like just run this through ChatGPT and let it do like a summary. You could reduce this book to probably 1/3, and it would be probably even better. More action. So those are the two books that I'm reading. Let's go into the kitchen. As you know, I love watching anime and also recently more Japanese and Korean television series. Some of my patrons on the Discord server were recommending television series, Korean television series. What always strikes me is that almost in every anime and kind of more the slice of life type of stories, there's always eating going on. And in some of the animes, it's beautifully animated, and you get hungry just by watching the story, because people are always like eating these ramen noodles and everything. So one of the things that always tempts me, and I know it's not very healthy, but that is all these ramen noodle hacks that I see on TikTok. And so the other day, I saw a video, and someone was recreating a ramen recipe based on a movie called Parasite. It's a Korean movie. And I tried to find it on the streaming platforms, but it's not available here in Europe. I think it is available on Prime. I'm not sure in North America. Anyway, it's in the movie. It's about this very rich family, and they make a ramen dish, and they mix two types of ramen noodles with the condiments, of course. One of which is very popular on TikTok and is also a staple in a lot of supermarkets here. And it's the brand Samyang Buldak. And it's hot chicken ramen. And when a Korean company puts hot or spicy on Korean food, it's not just hot and spicy. No. It's Mount Doom level, ring of power, destructive fire from hell. So hot chicken ramen should actually be renamed Mount Doom Mordor ramen, because it is, if you eat it, you should have a fire extinguisher next to your plate. That's how hot it is. So in the movie, apparently they mix this hot chicken ramen with another type of ramen, and then they put like very expensive steak on top of it. And some of these TikTokers are like, "Oh, I can make this. These are well-known brands." And so the other day, my local supermarket had a sale, a ramen sale, and all the famous TikTok ramen from Samyang Buldak were all on sale for I think just 99 cents per meal, and usually they're like twice that amount. And so for days I've been thinking, am I going to do this? Because I've already eaten the hot chicken ramen once, and it's a miracle that I can actually record this podcast, because I thought that my tongue had reduced to a piece of charcoal. It was so incredibly spicy. But I've also heard, and I don't know if this is true or if this is just a cruel practical joke, but I've heard that you can actually train yourself to eat more spicy. Now tell me if this is true or not, or if you have any advice on how to get used to this, because I'm intrigued. But I ultimately ended up not buying the Samyang Buldak hot chicken ramen, because I still remembered how much I suffered when I first ate it. I was like, why would people eat this without being paid for it? You need to hire a stuntman for this kind of ramen. So I was like, yeah, no, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. Maybe I should first somehow try to get used or better used to spicy food. But I did pick up another type of ramen, which was called chapaghetti. Never heard of it, but apparently this is a very good imitation of a Chinese noodle dish, which just the name chapaghetti is like, yeah, it sounds like spaghetti, and the noodles are very thick. I was just intrigued, and it was like, for 99 cents, what I knew from the reviews I saw on YouTube, this is not spicy. So I'm going to try the chapaghetti one of these days, and I'll let you know. But anyway, if you have any noodle advice or ramen advice for me, you know where to find me on Discord in the kitchen section.
We are on the cutting edge of technology.
Wow. Well, what does that mean?
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device. And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build... Whoa.
Well, all your technology stuff, it just ends in disaster.
But there is one more thing.
So, I'm back to being a full-fledged 100% Apple fanboy now that I've made the switch from the Apple iPhone 10 to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's too many words in those titles. Anyway, if you want to see an unboxing video of the iPhone, and even the video that I recorded right after I purchased it, go to the tech section, the tech club on the Discord server, because I posted the videos there. It was a lot of fun. When the iPhone came out, I was starting to get a little bit nervous because I had ordered the thing like even before Apple was taking orders. So I imagined I'm going to be on top of the list. I'm going to be one of the first people in the Netherlands to get my iPhone. And then the day comes and everybody has an iPhone. I didn't even get an email. And I was like, this is wrong. This is impossible. There has to have been a first batch. I'm going to the store. So the next day I go to the store. Turns out that they had made a spelling error when they were writing down my email address. The phone had already been there for a day. They just sent an email and got an error message back. The thing is, if that happens, according to what I read on their website, if you don't pick up that phone within 48 hours, and of course I didn't know that they had it, but after 48 hours, they are allowed, or they allow themselves, to then give it to the next person on the list, on the waiting list, who ordered the same model. And then they will reorder yours. Of course, I already paid at least 10% of the overall amount, but they will just reorder it. But as you know, the iPhone Pro Max is a massive success for Apple, and now delivery dates are extend far into November. So I would have had to wait 2 months even before to get the one. Had it not been for this kind of like sixth sense, I was like, something tells me that this doesn't compute. There's something wrong. I went to the store. It turns out that they did have the model, so I was over the moon. I installed the whole thing this morning after Mass, and it's currently doing the update of my Apple Watch to the new iOS 10. And so the rest of the week I'll be playing around with the iPhone. It is so cool. The other thing that is new in my life and Apple related is I've always used Spotify and then just a free version of Spotify to listen to music because, normally it's $10 a month. But the free one has very low quality music and it has ads all the time. Now, I just zone out whenever I hear an ad like that. I'm like, okay, it's just once every 20 minutes or something. I can handle that. But I also have a subscription to Apple TV, which is, I think, $6.99. And then, anyway, at one point, Inge, our community manager, says, I'm going to get a subscription to Apple One, or I switched to Apple One because I would like to keep Apple TV. I also would like to have more iCloud storage so I can do backups there. And I want to switch from Spotify to Apple Music. And we were talking about it, and we said, well, we could also do like a family account, which is if you split it up between multiple people, it's actually very affordable. But then you get, of course, the downside is you're all on the same account. So it splits up the iCloud storage and everything. But I now have, for much less than I was paying originally, Apple Music, Apple TV, Apple Arcade, which is a little bit disappointing. It's not that good, the games. But anyway, it's there. And the iPhone 15 apparently is very good at video games. So maybe we'll get some nice exclusive games that use that computing power. And iCloud storage. I think that's it. And I have to say, I'm blown away, especially by Apple Music. So I used an app to convert all my playlists from Spotify to Apple. That was effortless. But now I'm listening to uncompressed, high-quality music. And what a difference does that make? It's like food, like junk food and restaurant food. If you eat junk food every day, that's what you know. And then you go to a restaurant and it's like, oh, I had no idea that French fries could taste this good. Well, that's how I feel with Apple Music. Now that I listen to really good, uncompressed quality music, I was like, how have I been listening to Spotify low-resolution music for all these years? This is so much better. And so the other thing that I figured out is how to use the spatial audio, which is basically Dolby... what's it? Dolby Logic? No, Atmos. Dolby Atmos. Originally, I thought that would only work with Apple branded headphones, but I have no intention of buying headphones. I already have a very good pair of Sony headphones, and then I did some research, and I noticed that it's actually also possible to use Dolby Atmos on any set of headphones. You just have to switch it in the settings to Dolby Atmos always on, whereas the default is automatic, and then it will only work with Apple headphones. So now I'm using my good quality Sony wireless headphones, and I have this crystal clear spatial audio, especially when you're listening to movie scores. It is insanely beautiful. It is so good. So really, really enjoying Apple there. I'm a very, very happy Apple fanboy right now. So looking forward to showing you some of the footage that I'm going to shoot with the iPhone 15. Of course, there's a lot to discover. There's so much functionality, and only now people are starting to review it and test it out. There are going to be a lot of Apple stories in the near future here on the show. Thank you so much for being a patron. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't seen it already, I'm also posting summaries of the story and of the Gospel for Geeks on the Patreon website. The Patreon website is not just for paying contributors. There's also an option to join the Patreon community for people who, for whatever reason, are unable to support my work financially, but they still can read all those articles that I post. It's a bit of an experiment, and like the story this morning, I talked about the photos that I took and the photos by James at Meta. On Patreon, I will post some of those photos, so it adds a little bit extra value to the story. So even if you've already listened to the audio version of the story, there's still extra reason to go to Patreon to see the photos that I talk about. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. God bless.